So this is a beautiful inscription at the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. Now, Apollo is a Greek god, and he was the god of light and music and medicine. And this says in Greek, gnothi sauton. And this means to know yourself. And it seems at first a paradox, right? Because what does it mean to know yourself? Like, you have to live in your own head all the time anyway. You know, you have to know you. So what does it matter? You have to live with you anyway. But that's the point. In the world in which we live, everything is changing so incredibly fast. Everything is rapidly evolving, and everything is inconstant. You are your only constant. And being aware of who you are and what your values and your aspirations are, what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and what happiness and success mean to you is the key to being happy and successful to begin with. And I know many of you are interested in hearing me speak about Harvard and how to get there. And I will a little bit, but I have to tell you, I don't know. I don't know what the right scores are. I don't know what the right classes are. And frankly, I don't care. And neither should you. I'm gonna try and convince you today that finding out what makes you happy and what you find fulfilling is far more important than what you study or where you go to school. And so I'm gonna start with a little bit about myself and how I have, and I'm still figuring out, the sort of many pieces of my identity. If I could. Thank you. So like many of you, I'm the child of first-generation Chinese immigrants. I moved here from Tianjin, China when I was 7 years old. I think I grew up thinking about the sort of double-edged sword of multiculturalism, because I grew up eating bai cai but reading Margaret Atwood. It's such a paradox, right? Because I grew up very much ethnically Chinese, but socio-politically and ideologically Canadian. And for a long time, this was like a very confusing question for me. Am I Chinese or am I Canadian? And in the end, I think that this is the first identity crisis that I ever really had about which country I belong to. And I think that this dualism, which we as Chinese Canadian citizens share, is actually an incredible advantage. And why is that? F. Scott Fitzgerald of Great Gatsby fame wrote that the first test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time. Cognitive dissonance in the fury world which we are about to enter is inevitable, and I attribute much of my ability to understand complex ideas and complicated concepts to this initial questioning of my identity, what it means to be simultaneously Canadian and Chinese. And I really encourage you to do the exact same thing. Why do you feel most comfortable hanging out with the people you hang out with? How does your ethnicity inform your national identity? Ask yourself difficult questions. So my next identity crisis really came in high school. And I entered high school thinking I was only going to study science and math, because somehow these subjects seemed to me like they were more important than language. Like, who cares about language, right? I want science. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever felt that way. But when I was in high school, I had the great fortune of having several English teachers who presented me with a conundrum. They showed me the most beautiful, complicated, moving novels and essays I have ever read. It seemed to me impossible all of a sudden that the hard, sharp edges of science could parallel the grace of language. My English and French and Latin teachers encouraged me to read deeply and fervently in any language that I could. And I'm not saying this to send all of you out there to go and read Shakespeare. I couldn't imagine anything duller. I'm saying this to suggest to you that there are many ways to gain knowledge, to see the complicated world in which we live. It's not just reason and ethics. It's not just science and math. The Canadian bioethicist Margaret Somerville, in her CBC Massey lectures, which, by the way, I highly recommend, pointed out that there are many ways through which human beings can acquire knowledge. And you see some of them up on my slides here. So Dr. Somerville says there are sort of 4 general ways of finding out about the world: reason and ethics, imagination and creativity, experiential knowledge, and moral intuition. You can come to know an idea by reading about it, by understanding equations about it, but you can also come to know an idea by listening to a symphony, seeing a painting, or living an experience. Let your soul and your mind be hungry for knowledge of all kinds. If science or math or language isn't your medium, then perhaps dance or music or politics or the stock market is. Challenge yourself. Why do you like to do the things you do? Do you even like them to begin with? What do you like to do in your spare time without having been asked to? And if that thing is playing lots and lots and lots of video games, great. How are you going to gain knowledge and insight and an experience out of playing those video games? When you participate in extracurriculars or classes, do you do it because your parents asked you to or because you want to? Think about that very carefully. The mention of parents leads me to sort of my next inflection point in sort of figuring out who I am. And I have been blessed with the best parents. They're incredibly kind and supportive, and they have loved me all of my life, despite all of the stupid mistakes I have made and all of the bad decisions I have chosen to make. But the thing is, no matter how well-intentioned your parents are, no matter how much they love you, they will never know your life as well as you do. It's your life. The values that your parents hold, their beliefs and their experiences are to be expected and respected, and they are to be listened to, but they can't be yours. Your parents have lived very different lives from you, and they can't know what will make you happy and fulfilled. Only you can do that. It's a scary thought, I know. Sometimes when I'm at school and away from home, I don't know what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. All I want is to call up my parents on the phone and say, can you tell me what I'm supposed to do? Can you make a path for me? But the thing is, I'm aware at the end of the day of the fact that the only person who can make the right decisions is me, and that I must be responsible for my own choices. I don't always make the right choice. I frequently make the wrong one. But my mistakes are mine to learn from. I don't get to blame anybody for the mistakes that I made, but I also don't have to share the pride and the happiness that comes from making the right choice. The Nobel laureate Toni Morrison, in her novel Beloved, described a young woman as having to step off the edge of the world in order to reach out to her community and help her family. And this is a terrifying experience, but it is the one thing that allows her to become an adult. I think that growing up, part of growing up, is about finding your autonomy from your parents. So step off the edge of what you know. Step off the edge of what your parents know. Develop your own ideas about what the right thing to do is. Ask yourself how you decided what was right and what was wrong to begin with. Read constantly. This gives you glimpses into life experiences that you have yet to live. Remember, you don't owe anybody anything. You don't owe them your successes or your failures. Your life is your own, and you are responsible for your choices. Now I'm going to say a little bit about Harvard and what it's like to be there. And for me, Harvard has been one big adventure in finding out who I am. And so, if I could get a slide, please. Thank you. Harvard is a place that people have very strong feelings about. Love it or hate it, but you can't be apathetic about it. It is beautiful and teeming with energy. It's immensely inspiring and at the same time immensely terrifying. At Harvard, I studied two of the things which are dearest to my heart: neuroscience and the classics. While these two subjects may seem, at first, disconnected, and second, not very practical, my ability to pursue both at Harvard is central to the idea of the liberal arts education. The liberal arts education is rooted in philosophically humanistic ideas. The medieval scholar Peter Paul Vergerio says it best, and you can see his quote on this slide here. We call those studies liberal, which are worthy of a free man. Those studies by which we attain and practice virtue and wisdom. The liberal arts education at Harvard revolves around the idea that the undergraduate education is not for training students for a career. Instead, the world is evolving at a pace that much of what we learn in our undergrads will be obsolete or irrelevant in 10 years, in 15 years, perhaps right after college graduation. So, at Harvard, what we do is we attempt to learn the things and the skills which will never become irrelevant. As the author Elie Wiesel put it, can I get a slide, please?